Howdy ESSM 406. This lecture is all about giving you a background on communities and providing you a little bit of the academic framework that has come through the study of communities and collaboration. So in the previous unit, we read Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons. Now this is one of the most famous essays ever published in a scientific magazine. It's been widely cited and has been very influential in terms of how people think about policy. Now, in that paper, Hardin poses the problem about communal grazing. And he also proposed there's only two solutions. He said, one, the government can step in, divide up the property so everyone has private property rights. Or two, the government, again, can step in and regulate how many animals people can graze in the commons. And this became the standard for what policy recommendations were used for environmental problems. Either you privatize or you impose prescriptive command and control regulation. Now, at the same time all this was going on, there were many people, mostly anthropologists, studying people who were managing their natural resources for a really long time. So in one of the articles you read, Andres and Johnson, they talk a little bit about this history and some of the classic examples. A few of those anthropologists were studying people who had grazing commons, just like Hardin described, up in the Swiss Alps. Now the Swiss actually keep records, really great records for a very long time. And they have documentation for how these grazing rights have been managed for thousands of years. And it's been sustainable. It's been a sustainably managed grazing commons where the community has used this resource together for thousands of years. And this is really contrary to everything that Garrett Hardin said about Tragedy of the Commons. Now, there's other people that have been out studying fisheries and found some of these fisheries are also sustainable. Hardin's ideas would ostensibly apply to fisheries as well. It's a common pool resource, as you all now know. And some of these fisheries weren't overharvested. Another example is forests. You would think a forest would be susceptible to being overharvested as well. And Agrawal, one of your other readings, talks about what happens in Nepal, where he also found many communities that were not overharvesting. So what's going on here? There was a bunch of other people asking this question as well. So in the 1980s, a group of these folks, there were anthropologists, there were geographers, political scientists, natural resource managers, biologists, they all got together. Now remember, Hardin wrote his essay in 1968. So this meeting happened in the 80s. Now, this meeting was sponsored by the Natural Resources Council, which is a national scientific body. And they wanted to ask that very question. What's going on? Why are there some systems that appear to defy the tragedy of the commons? Now, the leader of this group was Elinor Ostrom. You might remember her from when we talked about her earlier in the class. Now, she's the first, and so far only, woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize in economics. And actually, she wasn't even an economist. She was a political scientist. But her fundamental insight was that there are certain characteristics that tend to lead communities to be able to sustainably manage their resources together. Now, she didn't say any community can manage their resources sustainably. And she also didn't say we don't need government. She said under certain circumstances, communities will be successful in managing their resources well. And you don't need to have just two solutions, either private property rights or command and control prescriptive regulation on how many animals you can graze. She said there are other solutions that communities can come up with. Now, and when you think about it, this makes sense, right? So I'm sure many of you live in a house with roommates, and you have to decide amongst yourselves who's cleaning the dishes, who's keeping this room clean, who's cleaning the bathroom. So as a community within your house, you're coming up with rules for how to manage your common resource, the house. Now, Elinor Ostrom called what we're talking about with communities or for you in your house, she called these institutions. And that's just a basic way of framing the rules that help to manage resources sustainably. Now, she published a book called Governing the Commons, which I'm giving you the opportunity to read a chapter of for this class. And this book, including her ideas in it, are the reason she won the Nobel Peace Prize. So you're reading some really important work here. Now, in the next video, we will discuss Dr. Ostrom's design principles and her big ideas for communities and how they work together to successfully manage their natural resources.